Oh. I liked the one up here that was like changing colors, and at one point it was like Darth Vader red. That was pretty funny. That was pretty funny. Looked a little cultish. I liked it. I didn't mean, well, it's I don't know, it's white guy time of year, and this is what white guys wear, like Eddie, just so no, we didn't plan it, but it happened. Proof, which is proof of, yeah. Yeah. So I heard a quote this week, which has nothing to do with my sermon, but I wanted to share it with you guys, except that I forgot one thing I'm supposed to do over here. So I'll tell you the quote while I'm doing this thing. I heard a quote on the radio that I really liked, and it said, "You cannot simultaneously wish for an easy life and strong character because the cost of each is the other." And I thought that was pretty good, so I'm going to leave that with you guys to be thinking about. You cannot simultaneously wish for an easy life and strong character because the cost of each is the other. All right, that was for free. Today we're going to be talking about kind of a hard truth. We're going to be talking about consequences today. We don't talk about consequences a lot, right? For the most part, except I feel like consequences probably get talked about the most in really hyper-religious churches, maybe. But across the board, it's not just like a conversation we just usually have out on the board. And I think a lot of that is because, I think there's a couple reasons. I think the big one is confusion. I think there's a lot of confusion and kind of misunderstanding or maybe even mysticism in a way surrounding consequences. There's all these, or maybe you don't have them. I have all these questions where it's like, at what point does God stop protecting me from consequences and start letting me experience them, right? Does that happen because he gets mad at me? Are consequences like a result of me ticking him off, where's that line, where does that happen? When do I suddenly cross a line where now I'm getting to read, there's just all this sort of uncertainty, I feel like, surrounding consequences. And because of that, I think we avoid talking about it. And also because of this, I think for a lot of us as churches, we talk a lot about grace and mercy because those are two concepts that we have a really hard time grasping. So we talk a lot about grace and mercy, the God of grace and mercy. And here's the thing, at face value, a lot of times, because we struggle to understand, because there's confusion, the God of grace and mercy seems to be at odds with the God of consequences, right? And you see that within church as well, where there's kind of these polarized groups almost of, there's the grace and mercy people who are kind of like hedgy about consequences because it doesn't sound very loving or seem very gracious. And then there's the kind of the hard religion, I hate to say hellfire and brimstone, but you know what I'm talking about. There's kind of the consequence heavy that's kind of like, well, you don't want to get too carried away with grace and mercy, right? And those two sides are kind of almost at war with each other a little bit. And so what I would like to try to do this morning, attempt is the key word, is to kind of clear the slate and let's set aside our perceptions of what we've seen and what we've been told and stuff, and let's just think open-mindedly this morning, because I think that what we can come to is to see that the God of mercy and the God of consequences are one and the same. And obviously, I think we know that, but I'm talking about emotionally understanding it. So that's kind of what we're doing today. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6. This is one of the more unpopular verses in the Bible. You're not going to see this tattooed on somebody's forearm or cross-stitched on a pillow. This is not one of the more popular verses in the Bible. Hebrews 12:6 says, "And have you forgotten the encouraging words God spoke to you as his children? He said," and Paul is quoting a proverb here, from the book of Proverbs. I didn't actually have time. I forgot to look up which one. It says, "My child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline." Don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you. And if I could just throw in here, I see two ends of the spectrum here. The spectrum. Don't make light of the Lord's discipline. Don't treat it lightly. Don't take it trivially. But at the same time, on the flip side, don't give up. Don't feel hopeless when He corrects you. Okay? For the Lord disciplines those He loves. Who does He discipline? And He punishes each one that He accepts as a child. Now that's where it gets tricky. He punishes each one He accepts. Like, I grew up in a family of, like, we valued tough love, but that seems like a step even farther, like almost sadistic. Like, if I love you, I'm going to punish you. That doesn't sound very loving, right? So these are hard verses to read because we read them and it's like, that feels like pulls me away from God, not pushes me towards Him. But we got to understand this. He punishes each one He accepts as His child. As you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as His own children. So this discipline that we experience, when we experience consequences, understand that that is a mark of our acceptance. Okay? If God doesn't discipline you, as He does all of His children, it means that you are illegitimate and are not really His children at all. Since we respected our earthly fathers who disciplined us, some of us might have, shouldn't we submit even more to the discipline of the Father of our spirits and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they knew how. But God's discipline is always good for us. I need us to see that. God's discipline is when? Always good for us. So that we might share in His holiness. So that we might experience His redemptive work in our life. So that we might experience His healing. Experience being made whole and walking in righteousness. Which isn't for Him, it's for who? Thank you. Oh boy, a few of you had that. We got a little work to do. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening, amen? It's painful. It's very painful. But afterward, there will be a harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. In this way. Now, let's see. So take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. Mark out a straight path for your feet so that those who are weak and lame will not fall but become strong. Now, I really like the way the ESV version has that last verse 12 there. Because when I read that, it's kind of like, well, who's this for? ESV says it this way. It says, therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. So that that which is broken within us may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. So here's the first thing that I want us to understand. Consequences in our life. Consequences are part of God's redemptive process. God's redemptive process in our lives, healing and making new that which has been broken, isn't complete without us experiencing consequences. So I want us to see this because this is a common area of misconception where we really struggle with consequences. Consequences are not to make you right with God, they're to make you right with yourself. Okay? I need us to understand that. Consequences don't do anything for God. When I punish Ann, it doesn't do anything for me. And I'm flawed. Like, I get irritated with her. You know, like, I'm not going to say I enjoy giving her a spanking, but boy, now and then. You know what I mean? But see, God isn't that way, right? God doesn't stand to, He's not angry with you. He's hurt for you, right? So consequences don't do anything for God. They're not to, and that's where we get, I think, messed up a little bit sometimes, is we feel like we're paying penance to somehow appease God's anger or something, right? The consequences are to make you right with yourself. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. But I want you to understand something. To experience consequences in a constructive way, that's a big deal. To walk through consequences and have them lead us somewhere good, which is their intended purpose, we have to have two things. We have to, one, see them for what they are and understand what they are, which I kind of just gave you a hint on that. We have to understand what the purpose of consequences are, okay? And then two, we have to understand when we're experiencing them. We have to properly diagnose and understand when we're experiencing consequences. And we're going to talk about both of these things. What I just said, in other words, the way that we view consequences in our life will determine where they lead us, and hear this, ultimately whether or not we experience more. Okay? The way we interpret and process and engage with consequences in our life will determine whether or not we experience more consequences, whether or not we reap the rewards that they're supposed to bring about in our life, or continue going down a path reaping more consequences, because God's not going to stop pursuing us. Okay? So let's talk about that first thing, what they are, understanding what consequences are and what their purpose is. This is something that I've recently come into an awareness about. When we talk about recovery, or we talk about our healing journey, or any of that kind of stuff, right, which, call it what you will, but when we talk about this process of sanctification, right, growing, healing, there's kind of all of these different, unrelated but linked together, I'll call them tools, in our belt. And I think a lot of times we get, like, maybe you guys have done this, we learn a new thing and it's like, oh, I've got it now. It's like, oh, this is like life-changing. And it is life-changing. But then you truck along and then you find out, and then God grows a new tool in your belt that's like, and so it's kind of like we tend to look and go, okay, I've got group meetings and now, okay, that's it. That's my path. That's my healing. And it is a huge part of it. And your healing will be lacking if that's missing. But then there's other parts as well that make up this puzzle or this pie of this redemptive process. So I'm going to describe some of these parts. Like the first one that we probably encounter is a community of grace. A community of grace. I forget I have them here. We experience a community of grace, and that's a tool in the belt. That's a piece of the process where, and here's the deal, in the community of grace, as we engage with that, it's a place where we can be honest and we can expose our true self, the darkest parts of our true self, and experience grace. Experience acceptance instead of rebuttal and rejection. And so in that experience, some of you guys have done this, shame begins to die. That's a big part of what that part of the puzzle does. Shame begins to die. The things that I'm most shamed about only die when I have exposed them to someone else in confession or whatever, being honest, walking in the light. That's where shame dies, okay? It's a hugely important piece of the puzzle. But it's not the only piece of the puzzle. We talk about this next one a lot. Introspective. That introspective process, whether you're doing it in a group, or whether you're doing it in therapy, or whether you're journaling, or whatever it might be, that process of looking into the past and recognizing the things that formed us, the lies that we came to believe because of the pain that we experienced. So we begin to understand what formed us. We begin to uproot those lies. Have you all had those aha moments where it's like, that's why I've always reacted to that. That's why I've always felt that way. That's why I've always responded that way. It's because of a lie that I've believed. And so this introspective process is another tool in the belt. It's another part, a piece of the pie, okay? This next one, awareness. We begin to grow in an immediate awareness of our emotional, physical, spiritual condition. And a lot of you guys know this in recovery, like every type of recovery has some kind of awareness tool, okay? In my recovery, we call it the faster scale. And it's this emotional scale of like checking through it every day and where am I at? And it's helping us do something which we never do, which is stop and let that inner struggle speak. Let our feelings speak instead of just trying to suppress them and try to outrun them and whatever. Have you guys ever seen I think one of them has, one of the counselors here has it on a pillow, the emotional circle or whatever? Feelings wheel, thank you. Thank you. The emotional circle. the feelings wheel. Okay, so every type of recovery has some kind of emotional awareness thing because it's an important piece of the puzzle. Because as long as we're just going through life, ignoring our feelings, our emotions, our physical health, our spiritual, as long as we're not aware of where we're at, then we're not equipped to make good decisions, and that stuff just sneaks up on us and gets us. We're walking in anxiety. We're dealing with pressures. We're struggling with fear. We're having all these things that we're not acknowledging. And so they're affecting us, but we're not actually making a good plan for how to deal with them. See, when I'm walking in emotional awareness and I go, oh man, I can see that I'm struggling with anxiety, instead of trying to tough my way through it, see, health starts looking like, okay, I just felt that. Yeah, I'm struggling with some anxiety here. I'm starting my way down the scale, and it doesn't end anywhere well. So, okay, what could I do to avert that path that I've gone down a million times before? What could I do to do a different thing with this? How might I acknowledge this and be honest about it with myself, maybe with others if I need to? See, that emotional awareness, which is the one we focus on the most, but others are important as well. Hey, I'm tired physically. Like that's, I'm not going to tough through that. Whatever, you get my point. Super key. Very important piece of the puzzle, and it equips the next one. Here's another one we deal with a lot. Discipline. Discipline. So this would be like making plans, setting boundaries, guardrails, beginning to exercise certain disciplines in our life. And a lot of times that's in response to our newly gained emotional awareness. Okay, so you know what? I'm really struggling with anxiety. I'm not going to go binge watch TV because that's going to lead me into a bad mental okay, I'm going to put certain guardrails or boundaries in place, right? Discipline, beginning to live life with certain disciplines. That's another tool in the belt. All of these things. And a lot of times, this is what I was saying earlier, we get in a community of grace and it's like, I found my healing. Instead of seeing it as a tool. And so, and if you're like me, then you push along and you work and you get all this great change and it's like, oh man, I love this. But then we hit a wall. It's like, oh, well, this was, what am I missing now? And then we learn how another piece of this puzzle works and functions within this process that we're all walking through, okay? Now, I went through this entire agonizing thing to say this, back to consequences. Consequences are a tool in that belt as well. Consequences are, and we're going to talk about this more later, consequences are where pain restructures what our brain reaches for. And we've got to understand what it is and what its purpose is. That's what I said earlier. We've got to understand what its purpose is, see it for what it is in order to properly engage with it. Consequences are another tool in the belt right in the list with all of those other things. We would like to think that we're above this, but the reality is there's a certain amount of experiencing the pain of our decisions that is necessary for us to begin to count the cost and train ourselves that it isn't worth it anymore. There's just a certain amount of that we're just too hard-headed, and we just need some of that physical pain to teach us, right? This is an important point that I want you to understand. I did not used to think this. God will not protect you from consequences. I always kind of thought that God, and I'm going to say, so don't, give me a second here. God will not protect you from consequences. I used to think that God, because he loved me, because he had a plan for me, and I was walking out a calling or something or I was now walking a good path. See, this is another one we get tripped up on. So we weren't walking a good path, and now we're in recovery, and we're walking a good path, but we experience consequences, and it kind of throws us a little bit because there's kind of sometimes this belief that God shields us from consequences. But I want you to know that God does not protect us from consequences. That's kind of a myth, because to do so would rob you of an essential ingredient to change in your life. And he's not going to do that. Here's what he will do. God will be as merciful as possible in the way that we encounter consequences. Okay? How many of you guys can look at your past and say, man, so many bullets dodged, despite the fact that things aren't great where I'm at, despite the fact that I'm experiencing consequences, it could have been worse. So I want you to understand, God will be as merciful as possible as he pursues us in this way. What did it say earlier? As we are trained in this way, but he won't rob us of the experience. I'll say it this way. Grace and mercy are very much present in our consequences. God is merciful in dealing out our consequences, but consequences are also present because of grace and mercy. Okay? Because if God was not to allow you to experience consequences, if he was not to bring them about, that would be neither gracious nor merciful to you, because it would be robbing you of something that is such a important piece of beginning to walk in freedom and walk towards change. We on the same page there? All right. So number 2, that's what consequences are. We've got to understand them, understand their purpose. Not just see them as God got mad and smacked me upside the head or whatever. We've got to understand their purpose and their function within the tool belt, okay? That's the first thing, if we're going to encounter consequences and engage with them in a way that is constructive. Here's the second part, and this is a biggie. I should call you out for that. Sorry, guys, that was just personal between me and them. All right. Correctly identifying consequences. We have this problem that we tend to misdiagnose consequences, okay? We tend to blame consequences on other factors that make us a victim of the situation instead of responsible for the situation. And this will disconnect us from the work that consequences are meant to bring about in our life. Now, I might be worse about this than you guys are because I'm really bad about this. But these are some common misdiagnoses that we might have. And hopefully somebody will laugh if this has been them, because this has been me. The universe is against me. It doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to work out. God's path let me down. God's path, like I've sacrificed and I've committed myself to this thing and it just hasn't gone that well. God's somehow vindictive or something. My wife is a blank. What you put in that blank is on you, okay? I'm absolved myself of any responsibility there. My husband is a blank. Safe haven only cares about money, and they're doing me wrong. The system has it out for me. The system's against me. My PO is a blank. Again, these blanks are on you guys. I'm just saying. And here's the thing. If I could bring up immediate versus cumulative consequences real quick. Because there's these consequences that happen that they're like push a button and get shocked, right? It's hard to blame those on anybody. We might do it. Maybe we're very talented at blaming, but they're hard to blame anybody, right? Like I just did that and it blew up on me. But then and this is where we struggle with the misdiagnoses, and this is important, there's cumulative consequences, and these are perhaps even more important than the immediate ones. Cumulative consequences, where we have been engaging in a behavior or a lifestyle for so long. And can I just say this about sinfulness? There's overt sin, which is like, okay, I'm going and acting out and getting high and relapsing or whatever. You fill in the blank. There's overt sin, but sin is also choosing to not trust God with the situation and try to fix it myself. Refusing to believe. And so when I talk about consequences of sin, let's please don't define it just to when I was being really bad, because there's all these things that we still struggle with that are sinful. And they bring about consequences. So when I talk about a sinful lifestyle, I'm not just saying going out there and being out on the streets or whatever. It's a sinful lifestyle when we live in such a way that we don't trust God and we constantly try to work it out for ourselves. And you know what? There's long-term, when we live that way, there's cumulative consequences that we experience in our lives. And it's really easy to blame those on other things because we didn't just push a buzzer and get burned. It might be 5 years of it that's finally coming home to the roost, as they say. It's really easy to blame that. But here's the deal. Here's how you can know that you're being bamboozled in this way. I love that word. Y'all hear me, when we fixate on one person or one entity's contribution to our circumstances, disproportionately to or completely even ignoring, whatever, disproportionately to our cumulative, long-term, time and time again contribution, then we are misdiagnosing the consequences. When you're sitting here and you're going, man, I'm not where I want to be in life. Why am I at Safe Haven? Why am I in this situation? Why is my marriage not where I want it to be? When you're sitting there and you're experiencing things that are happening and you are predominantly focusing on an entity's contribution. Safe Haven's doing me wrong. I'm not here to defend Safe Haven, y'all. They might be. Y'all get my point. The system's doing me wrong. The PO is doing me wrong. When you're hyper-focusing on one entity's contribution to your circumstances and not really focusing that much on your 10-year, 20-year contribution to it, then you are misdiagnosing consequences. Because here's the thing, and I want you all to hear me. Acute problems, I love this. Sometimes I write something down I really like. Acute problems are almost always the symptom of chronic behaviors. Okay? When you're experiencing acute symptoms in your life, I would be willing to bet a lot that they are predominantly the result of chronic decisions, chronic lifestyle, chronic behavioral things. That's the significant contribution. Now, this kind of seems like I'm beating us up a little bit here. Why is this important? Why am I making this really making this point again and again, as I love to do? Why am I beating this horse to death? Because here's the thing. The pain of consequences is meant to be placed in the folder of bad decisions. When the pain of consequences is associated with bad decisions, then the tally, the cost, goes on the tab of those bad decisions. And we learned something. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But when that pain gets placed in other folders, the discomfort gets disassociated from the decision. Okay? So when we think of that decision, we don't think of that discomfort. Because that discomfort was a result of so-and-so's doing whatever. Or such and such's contribution. It's not a symptom of the decision I made. And so the pain gets disconnected, and the connection that brings the healing is never made. Are y'all tracking with me there? That's why this is really important. Because remember this. I really want y'all to understand this. This is pretty huge. Our brains are hardwired to remember pain. Ask any therapist out there. This is no news. Our brains are hardwired. We are engineered by God to remember pain. This is why trauma is such a big deal. This is why we might not even remember the details of the event, but the truth that we learned from that event still dictates our decisions today, right? I still respond this way, even though I can't even remember the details of what happened there, but the pain, my brain does remember. My brain remembers the pain, and it's come up with a system to avoid that pain in the future. Okay? What this is, God built this into us, and this is what I want y'all to get, because this is, if you can get this is actually pretty big. God made us with this very unique ability for pain to be converted into understanding. A pain that we experience teaches us a truth. We experience pain and we gain understanding. The stove is hot, don't touch it. Very, very simplistic example. But see, this is how consequences are meant to work. God built us with this. We experience a consequence of a decision that we've made. We decided to spend money on that, it didn't work out. We decided to date that person, didn't work out. We experience a pain and it teaches us a truth about life. And we become wiser. We become more capable of navigating life without ending up in the same messes. It's an important mechanism God built into us. But here is what happens so often. Satan, like he does with everything, he knows that we have this mechanism, and it's the primary mechanism that he uses to get us into bondage. Because what Satan does is he takes that same exact mechanism and he hijacks it and makes it serve his purpose. Because what he does is he takes a painful situation that we experience and he teaches us a false truth. A false truth gets imprinted into our minds and hearts because of the pain we experienced. A false truth about our identity. A false truth about who we are and what God thinks about us, or how we should be with others, or you name it. So he takes a painful situation that was not I touched the stove and got burned. Somebody does us wrong, somebody hurts us, and he uses this mechanism to plant his lie deep in our hearts, whatever it might be, that we're not worthy, that only what we do is what makes us worth have any value or whatever. And he gets these lies, these false truths planted in our hearts via this mechanism that God gave us. And then those lies are what hold us in bondage. Those lies are why when you say something that you didn't mean anything by, it triggers that, we use that word trigger all the time, it triggers that pain, that thing, that truth, that false truth, I should say. It's why I respond strangely to things that aren't even meant that way because of those beliefs. And we talk a lot about that. But this pain to understanding mechanism is how that happens. And we need to understand that. If we can understand that, we actually gain quite an important piece of knowledge into how this works. And so Satan hijacks it and does it that way, but that doesn't take away from the fact that God's system of experiencing consequences and pain is intended to lead us into truth in the same way that Satan uses it to lead us into falsehood and lies. Y'all see that? That's a big deal. And so that's why this is so important. It's because if we don't see that the consequences we are experiencing are the result of our behavior, then we cut that process off. We don't learn anything from it. And we just get to experience blow after blow after blow because we just go through life putting our hand on hot stoves. Because the reason the stove burned us wasn't because we touched it. It was because you fill in the blank. And so we never learned the lesson that it was intended to teach. The reason I'm preaching this sermon this morning is because I dealt with this recently. I was praying to God and I was laying out some frustrations in my heart towards Him, where it's just like, God, why has my path led here? Why am I in this situation? Why have things gone in this way? I feel like your path hasn't led me anywhere good. I feel like I've just sacrificed for you and chosen to put you first, and it's just like, I just feel like every door I've tried to walk through is just shut in my face, and it just feels like everything's against me. But, I was having myself a real pity party. And I guess I was looking for God to kind of, give me some kind of affirmation, some kind of pick-me-up type of helping me, get up and move forward. And that's not what He did at all. I wasn't expecting it, but it was actually really good for me. He was like, yeah, I didn't want you to end up here either. He was like, David, you got to realize something. He's like, what you're experiencing in all these things you've just laid out, you're experiencing consequences of your choice. And remember, sin from this side to this side, from overt to subverted, or that's probably not even a word. You get my point. You walking in sin, you choosing to handle things yourself, you choosing to struggle with pornography for 15 years of your life. There's all of these things that have racked up a tab that you're experiencing the fruit of. You've made decisions because you weren't in a healthy place. And you've made emotional decisions to burn it all down and walk away from things that I told you to do. And yeah, you're experiencing the fruit of that. Now, what was cool about this is it wasn't a shaming thing. It wasn't a you're so bad and you need to feel horrible about yourself. It was just a really honest thing. Because the point behind the point that he was making to me and what he kind of said was, look, I can redeem it all. And I want to redeem it all, and I will redeem it all. Or at least I'll attempt to. But the problem is until you properly diagnose, until you properly let this pain you're feeling be a metric of counting the cost of these different things, until you let this pain leave its imprint on your heart, until you put the pain in the right file, you will consistently undermine my redemptive work in your situation. Because I'll redeem it. And I'll set about redeeming it. But see, you won't have learned. You won't have counted the cost. And so you'll go back there again thinking that you're not paying a price, not realizing the cumulative effect of these things. And so you'll go back there again, and then we'll just restart the redemption again. And you've been in this cycle for a while, and you're neither old nor young. How long do you want to do this? And so what he was told me, what he put in my heart was, David, it's time for you to count the cost. It's time. You can keep blaming my path. You can keep blaming the universe or your family or your church or whatever. I don't know, whatever. You can keep blaming stuff for where you're at. Or you can finally recognize and see this. Remember, the second part I told you, to experiencing consequences in such a way that they're productive in our life. The second part is correctly identifying them. He said, or you can correctly identify what you're going through as consequences of your behavior. You can surrender yourself to that whipping, so to speak, and you can let it convert into truth and understanding in your life. You can let that pain, just like lies you've believed have been rooted in pain in your life, this can become a truth that's rooted in a pain that you've experienced, where that your brain goes, you know what? I don't think I want to take this into my own hands. There's some red light going off in my brain that's going to hurt. I'm going to trust God with it this time. Y'all get what I'm saying? What I'm telling you is that the key to experiencing consequences productively in your life is once we understand their purpose and once we're able to identify them, the key is surrendering ourselves to them. Surrendering ourselves to God's process of discipline. Surrendering ourselves to that way, that training that verse described. Understanding that, I love in the Old Testament, there's this place where David does something bad, and God gives him an option of consequences he can experience. We don't often get that. But God gave David 3 choices. One of the choices was being defeated in battle or something like that for a set period of time. One of the choices, I forget, and one of the choices was to experience a pestilence, a disease, for a set period of time. And David said something unique, understanding what I'm about to tell you. David said, well, I'll choose the pestilence, because let me fall in the hands and let me fall on the mercy of God rather than experience my consequence at the hands of men. Let God give me my whipping, not anybody else. Because here's what David understood. Here's what we've got to understand to surrender ourselves to that process. That God will neither let us experience one bit more consequence than is needed to accomplish the work, but just as importantly, not one bit less. Okay? And when we understand that, then we can surrender ourselves to whatever He decides to prescribe. As a kid might think, 15 swats or 5 swats or whatever it's got to be. Because we trust His heart with it. And if I could just say this, there's a saying out there that I've heard in songs and stuff, really it's an attitude, it's kind of a worldview that, the crime doesn't fit the punishment. The punishment doesn't fit the crime, right? Like the punishment's worse than the crime deserves. And if I could just say this, that is an utter lie of the enemy. If you think that the punishment you're experiencing does not fit the crime that you've committed, then what I want to tell you, and I won't apologize for this, is that you are in deep, deep, deep denial as to the crime or crimes that you've committed. And that's not a shaming thing at all. But if you think, well, I didn't do anything to deserve this, I didn't do anything that bad, then you're in deep denial as to where you've really been at and what you've really done and how you've hurt and damaged yourself and how you've hurt and damaged others. And coming and breaking out of that denial and coming into a true understanding is also very key to walking the path of surrender when it comes to walking through the consequences you're experiencing. Because we're all experiencing consequences. Can I say that? Everybody here today, not just because a lot of you are in safe haven and probation and whatever, not just because of that. Everybody here is experiencing consequences. Because what did the verse say? It's which of God's children? All of God's children. All of those that God accepts, because He is gracious and because He loves them, He will, I think one of the versions says chastise. He will discipline them. He will let them experience consequences because that is part of His loving pursuit. That is part of His redemptive process. So if you are in that denial, Galatians 6:7 says, don't be deceived. God is not mocked. You can mock yourself. And you can get others to believe you, but that's to your own loss, because for whatever one sows, he will also reap. So when we look at our situations and say, well, I don't deserve this punishment or whatever, then what we're really doing is saying, well, God's not just. And all right, I'll quit with that. just beating us up. All right, I want to go back to our starting verse. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying today? Consequences are such an important thing for us to begin to face and embrace. Because, and I'll just say this, and I'm not picking on anybody, but in all the years that we've done this, I've watched an awful lot of attitudes come through here. Specifically, you guys that are, under the thumb of the system, at Safe Haven, whatever, and you're experiencing all kinds of consequences in your life. And I'll bring up this is a great example. You're having to write an essay, or you're getting something revoked because you didn't do something you were supposed to do, and it doesn't feel fair. And maybe it's not. But if I could zoom out a little here, because remember what I said about knowing when we're being bamboozled. Why are you at Safe Haven in the first place? Why are you on probation in the first place? And so, regardless of how that consequence is being fed to you at the given moment, you can choose to rebel against it, rail against it, run from it, fight it, have an attitude about it. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to get to experience more consequences. Or you can choose to recognize that even if the thing you're experiencing in that given situation isn't fair, we still own the lion's share of the reason that we're there. The reason that we're there is still predominantly because of our cumulative commitment to a particular lifestyle, behavior, or choice. And if we understand that and face it and embrace it and feel the pain of it, we are utilizing one of the tools of our redemptive process. And we are actually actively choosing to rewire our brain and train new pathways of, hey, remember when I went through that horrible season that where the PO was like all over me and this and that and the other, and it was awful? Let's not do this again because it led there. Are y'all with me? All right. Back to our starting verse. Hebrews 12, I'm going to start at verse 10 as we close here. God's discipline is always good for us, so that we might share in His holiness. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterward there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. And flipping to the ESV, therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. If I could say it this way, sure yourself up and set your teeth against one another and surrender yourself to that process. However many lashes that looks like, whatever amount of time it looks like. Make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Guys, consequences are part of God's redemptive process, but they only bring about His redemptive work if we will surrender ourselves to them, if we will let God grow us through them, if we'll quit fighting them, quit running from them, quit blaming them on somebody else, and start to see that they're part of His loving pursuit, and they're there to set us free. All right? You guys bow your heads with me? God, as we go through painful circumstances, and I'm not here to say that every painful circumstance we experience is a direct consequence of our behavior, because certainly there's things that happen to us that we didn't do anything to deserve, but those typically are the odd person out. God, as we experience the pain of choices that we've made, whether that be something overt or whether that be something that doesn't seem entirely sinful, not trusting you, God, not believing you, not walking in the way that you have set forth that brings and leads to life. God, when we're experiencing pain, God, help us put it in the right folder. Help us face it. Help us digest it so that it can bring about understanding in our life, so that it can bring about truth that sets us free. And I just pray that you'd help us to, those two things I talked about, that you'd help us to understand the purpose of consequences truly, and to break out of some of the myths and the misinformation out there about consequences and how they represent your heart and why you bring them about. Help us to properly understand their purpose. And secondly, God, help us to properly identify when we're experiencing them so that we can own them, so that we can put them in the right folder, so that we can properly count the costs and experience that freedom that comes from that. Some of us have experienced it where it's just like, hey, it ain't worth doing that anymore. And Lord, I pray this over all of us. I pray that you protect us, God, that you'd go with us, that you would be gracious with us in our mistakes, and that you would lead us in the paths of righteousness. In Jesus' name, amen. You guys have a great week.